Joining me now are two people who've been wide awake to the China threat and to the threat from the cancel culture, you know, with a culture where you don't actually engage in a public debate with someone, you just try to silence them, you know, strip the programs like this of advertising or drag them before a tribunal or a court or whatever, intimidate them, threaten them, bully the people into not listening to them. You don't answer the arguments, just try and shut them down. For a university to be part of that kind of, it's just disgraceful. Former Senator CORY BERNARDI, former leader of the Australian Conservatives, joins me, as does Liberal Senator James Paterson. James, speaking of China, you've called for the Chinese state media to be denied unrestricted access to our federal parliament as journalists. I mean, why is that sort of cutting against what I just said?
Well, because, Andrew, if these Xinhua News Service journalists are indeed journalists in any sense of the word, they do not resemble journalists that we have here in Australia. They work for a state-owned, state-directed, state-controlled Communist Party news agency, which has been credibly accused elsewhere in the world of facilitating propaganda and disinformation and even engaging in espionage. And yet they have access to Parliament House, unrestricted access to Parliament House, and the right to sign in guests to Parliament House with no oversight at all. And that led to a very serious incident on the 26th of June this year at the Prime Minister's press conference, where, as we now know, on the same day that Xinhua journalists were raided by ASIO in Sydney, Xinhua journalists turned up to the Prime Minister's press conference and aggressively filmed Australian journalists in an apparent attempt to intimidate them. Now, I think the right to come into our parliament is a privilege and it should come with a reasonable expectation of appropriate behaviour. That was not it, and I think their status should be reviewed.
Yes, we just showed some of that footage. I might show it again in a sec, of those Chinese journalists filming Australian journalists for some reason I don't know, and then getting very shirty when they were filmed in return. CORY, what do you make of it? Should we just welcome Chinese journalists, so-called real journalists, whatever they are, to Parliament House, or is there a security issue here?
Well, I think we've got to extend the hand of friendship in the ethic of reciprocity, Andrew. So if our journalists are safe and welcome and free to report on the goings-on in China, then I think their journalists should be able to do the same here. Unfortunately, they're not, and if they're in breach of the rules here, our domestic rules, well, they should be sanctioned. But may I just make this point, that James has made some very valid points about propaganda and just becoming apparatchiks of the state. It's not much difference when you look at the American media covering the US federal election. Twitter, Facebook, CNN, MSNBC, they are all propaganda arms ignoring real news, just putting out partisan support for whatever candidate they want. In this case, it's Joe Biden. So the media around the world has serious questions to answer, not just in China. But James has got a point. If we can't set the rules in our own country, why would we expect anything else anywhere else?
And of course, China made it so unsafe for Australian journalists in Beijing, the recognised ones, the licensed ones, I guess. The last two had to, including one from the ABC, had to race back to Australia for their own safety after getting a knock on the door after midnight. Can I just pick up, James, on something that CORY just touched on there about interference in media, the media interference in elections in the West, an issue I thought would have really upset every civil libertarian, every leftist, you know, screaming blue murder. You've got huge tech companies. You've got Twitter. You've got Facebook. They're now trying to block people from reading or reposting links to reports that a computer's been found with emails of the son of Joe Biden, the Democrat presidential candidate. These emails show Hunter Biden arranging a meeting between a Ukrainian gas company that was paying him reported $100,000 a month to this guy who's had been a drug addict, etc. And his father, he arranged the meeting between him and his father when Joe Biden was vice president and in charge of Ukraine policy. What do you make of how the social media giants are trying to smother this story?
Andrew, I think there's two really important separate questions here. Firstly, is this a good idea for social media giants to do that? And I would say no. I think they should support the free exchange of ideas and free and open debate. And the second question is, should it be legal? Now, as someone who does believe in property rights and freedom of speech and freedom of the press, I believe that if you start a social network and you want to attach conditions to what can be posted on that social network, you should be free to do so. You can say, we're the leftist social network and only leftist views are welcome here. But I think you should be honest about that and admit that and not hide behind cute excuses like, oh, we don't allow the posting of private information, or we don't allow information we don't know the provenance of. I mean, these social networks allowed WikiLeaks material hacked from the United States government to be posted very happily, but they're a bit uncomfortable about emails coming from a laptop handed into a New York repair store. So I think they have to be consistent and they have to be upfront and honest, and then it's up to us to judge them accordingly and take our patronage where we want to put it.
The one problem with James's theory that I see, though, Corey, is that, yes, I agree, property rights, and you shouldn't be made to carry messages you don't want to. I mean, if that's your network. But the point is that Twitter and Facebook have built up such massive market dominance, and only now they tell us they're going to do this. That actually disenfranchises a lot of people. There is a distortion here of the political process.
Andrew, I absolutely agree with you, but there is a technical difference. The media giants, when they were startups, they decided they didn't want to be publishers. They were just platforms. And so they were given an exemption under, I think it's Regulation 230 in America. And that exemption basically said, well, as long as you don't stifle the conversation, as long as you don't interfere and censor the conversation, we won't hold you to account for what is on those networks. And that's why they don't get sued, the social media networks, for what would be libelous in any other place. It's up to the individual. And so they're now in breach of that. It was all good and well when they were little computer boards or bulletin boards and people were building up their business, but now they have effectively a monopoly or a monopolistic oligarchical behaviour there. They say, well, we're going to censor whatever we want to. We will not allow opposing views. We'll do it in such a spurious manner that they can no longer be referred to as social media. It is socialist media. They are the gatekeepers to what we can see out there. It is an absolute travesty, and I think personally,
it's now publishers.
Yeah, they are.
And let's sue them.
They should be held to the. They should be held to the same account as publishers, and if they won't be held to that account, they should be broken up and dismantled. It's not about disrupting their property rights. They have changed the game from when they started.
James, finally, the ABC keeps suggesting these emails are a hoax. The interference they're running on this, half their program on AM this morning was, there could be Russians, disinformation from Russia. Could be, all that kind of stuff, instead of looking at the substance of them. America's head of national intelligence says the Russian collusion story is false. Have a listen.
Hunter Biden's laptop is not part of some Russian disinformation campaign. And the FBI has had possession of this. What I can say, without commenting on any investigation that they may have into corruption or fraud, is to say that their investigation does not center around Russian disinformation, and the intelligence community is playing no role with respect to that.
And, of course, Joe Biden himself has not said these emails are false. He's had days and days to do it. He refuses to do it. James, would you like a little bit more fair reporting from the ABC on this? He says, ironically.
Andrew, from 100,000 miles... Yeah, from 100,000 miles away, it is very difficult for me to determine the truth of this matter. What I think, though, is that the American people deserve to have open and free debate on any issue germane to the outcome of the election, just as we would want here in Australia. Yep. We should be able to have the full and free and fair facts and make up our own minds.
James Paterson, CORY BERNARDI, it was a great pleasure to catch up with you both. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andrew.